Okay, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Pesachim, 1 week at a time. This is lesson number 7, and this week we will be learning Daf 39, Lamed Tet. Interesting, that should remind you of our Lamed Tet Melachot, the 39 Melachot from Shabbat, through 45, Mem Hey. As Lynn reminded us on the chat, those of you who have been learning Daf Yomi from the beginning of the cycle, we have actually completed 1 full year. Last week was the Hebrew anniversary. Today is the English anniversary. But first of all of you who have been learning this whole time, first of all, kol hakavod, as they say in Hebrew. And it's really an incredible opportunity, an incredible accomplishment that you have accomplished till now. And as they say, chazak ve'ematz and alev atzliach, right? You should be strengthened and go from one strength to another. This should just be the beginning. I saw someone wrote on a Daf Yomi Facebook group today, you've done, 1 year down, 6.5 to go. So, I guess it depends on how you look at it, but, it's really been an incredible journey and, it's just the beginning. So, again, congratulations to everyone and, let us begin. So, okay. So, Daf 39, we will be discussing Marror. Marror are the bitter herbs that we eat on Pesach, on the Seder night. And the question is, what are these bitter herbs? So the Gemara has a list of 5 different, vegetables or vegetables. Lettuce, endives, horseradish, this charchavina, which is some vine that grows or something that grows around the palm tree, and burdock. So there is a list. The Mishnah continues and says that they may be eaten dry or wet. We'll discuss what this means in the Gemara. But they may not be pickled or boiled or cooked. I think the idea is that it needs to be sharp, and therefore it needs to be, in its regular state. The Gemara continues, and the Mishnah continues and says that they actually all combine to make a kazait. Again, you need a certain amount to eat on the Seder night, and you can have a little bit of each one. They combine into the amount, which is a kazait, the size of an olive. The Mishnah then says that the stalk of each one of these vegetables may be eaten, and oh, thank you, Zohar. I don't even know what those things are, but thank you for sharing. And
Look it up on more. I don't know what those are either.
Okay, I guess we'll have to Google it afterwards. Anyway, the Mishnah then says, again, our list of things that may be used, again, dmai, which we've mentioned previously, something if I'm not sure if tithes were taken. Again, maaser rishon, where the truma was taken off, maaser sheni, and something that was sanctified if it was redeemed. Again, this is our list that we have been seeing over and over again. In the Gemara, Rabbi Meir, again, we're on 39, Rabbi Meir says that you can use bitter herbs. Rabbi Huda says that you can use anything that has some sort of a sap. Again, that will be bitter. Rabbi Yochanan says it actually has to be a bitter vegetable with sap, and it needs to be pale. Interestingly enough, the law is that in the Shulchan Aruch, the law is that you can use lettuce or horseradish, and that is it. Meaning, even if we do Google what sea holly is, which I don't know what that means. But we do not use, practically those are not really options. And we do use only lettuce or horseradish. The Gemara then, explains why we use marror, again, the bitter herbs. So it says, why can you use lettuce? Lettuce isn't really so bitter, because the Hebrew word for lettuce is chasa, and the Gemara says, why do we use chasa? Because Hashem chas al Yisrael. The word chas is had mercy or compassion, and because lettuce reminds us of chasa, Hashem God had mercy on us, we can use lettuce. Again, marror from the word v'yimareru et chayehem. Again, this is this week's weekly portion, Parshat Shavua. We hear about again Sefer. We start Sefer Shmot, the Exodus, and it's the first parsha. We hear about the suffering of the Jewish people, and it says that they made their lives bitter, right? And therefore we use bitter herbs. The Gemara adds that just like horseradish, it starts off soft, but it gets hard. So too, the Jewish people in the beginning, their experience in Egypt was good, but it then later on, I guess, gradually became harder and harder till it was, till that they were enslaved. From here, the Gemara connects marror to matzah. Again, the fact that it's written together, we're going to learn certain laws. One is that they both need to grow from the ground. The other is it says mirorim, as in two, like plural. Therefore, we see that you can have two types of maror, as we've mentioned before, lettuce or horseradish. Rav says that all species that are considered maror can be planted together. Remember, as we mentioned in the Mishnah, they all combine into one unit or one shiur. Therefore, they're considered one type, even though there are different species here. Because they're all considered maror, they can be planted together, and we're not concerned for kilaim. Again, kilaim is the law that you are not allowed to plant two different species in close proximity. And here Rav says that all types of maror are considered one type or one species, and therefore you can plant them together. When we mentioned in the Mishnah that they can be eaten moist or dry, the Gemara says that this is referring to the stalks, but the leaves need to be moist, right? They can't be dry. You need to taste the maror. It can't be something dry that is tasteless. Again, we said maror and matzah are being compared, and therefore you can't use either of them from Maaser Sheni. Again, to remind us, we actually talked a lot about that last week. Maaser Sheni was the tithe that you needed to take up to Jerusalem and eat the food in Jerusalem. The issue was, remember we said last week, can matzah be made from Maaser Sheni? We said no, because it needs to be able to be eaten anywhere in Israel or anywhere in the world. And Maaser Sheni needs to be eaten only in Jerusalem. And therefore, the Gemara equates maror with matzah, and therefore maror also cannot be from Maaser Sheni. From here we get into a conversation about soaking grain, and does it become chametz, and what do we do? So the Mishnah says that you can't soak bran for chickens. Again, not for human consumption. Maybe we might have thought that for animal consumption it's okay. The Mishnah says no, but you can pour boiling water on top of them. Apparently that stops the fermentation process. Please do not try this at home. the Gemara continues and says that women can't soak bran to use in the bathhouse, maybe as a exfoliant, but they can use dry grain. Again, we're concerned that the grain is going to ferment, so as long as it starts off dry, that's okay. You also can't chew grain and then put it on a wound, because again, it is going to ferment, and that is problematic. The Gemara, though, adds that something that is already cooked or baked or boiled, meaning matzah, cannot become chametz afterwards. Another idea is that if water constantly drips on flour, it also can't become chametz. Again, I would not try this at home, but interestingly enough, there seems to be an understanding that if there's a constant drip, maybe it doesn't ferment. I guess you can try this at home and let me know what happens. The other is that you can't put parched flour. So the Gemara says, again, if the flour was parched, now it can't be leavened. It won't leaven, it won't turn into chametz. However, the Gemara tells us not to add it to our food to thicken it, lest you did not fully parch or bake this flour, and then we're concerned that it will become chametz. We are now moving on to Daf 40. Daf Mem, and here we're going to continue talking about like soaking grain. Again, soaking the grain was done to remove the bran or to remove certain parts of the grain. So the Gemara on Daf 40 says you can't soak 2 grains of wheat together, lest they stick together and they don't cook or get boiled on all sides, and then again that might lead to fermentation. Fruit juice, it seems, does not cause leavening. Again, interesting, maybe because it's a little acidic, maybe it stops the fermentation process, I'm not sure, or the leaven, I keep saying fermentation, but leavening. The Gemara then says that you can't soak barley on Pesach, but if you did and the kernels split, then that would be problematic. Again, that would mean that water got into the grain itself, and that will become chametz. But if the kernel didn't split, then it is okay. Again, don't do it, but if you did, it's okay. Rabbi Yossi says that vinegar stops the leavening process. Interestingly enough, we're going to see that this is not agreed upon by everyone. So Rabbi Yossi says it stops leavening. The halacha is not like him. And here there's a discussion about a group of people that are described as Baal Nefesh. I guess you can say soulful people. The Gemara says that these people fear heaven, or they go above and beyond the letter of the law. And they don't soak their grain, again, lest it become chametz. So it seems that there's a machloket if you can soak your barley or wheat, maybe one versus the other, meaning barley as opposed to wheat. But then the Gemara asks, but 1 minute, we know that there's clean matzah, or what we would call white flour matzah, and the only way to get it white is if you soaked the grain. So you see that you can soak grains of wheat, and that is left as a question. The next concept I think is very important. If any of you have ever made matzah or been to a matzah factory, it is the concept of guarding the matzah or the grain or the dough. It needs to be right. There's a concept of matzah shmura. It was guarded, shamur. It was guarded or watched. What was guarded? When was it guarded? So that's the conversation on Daf 40. Either it's guarded from the beginning when they even soak the grain to make the flour, or maybe it's just when you start kneading, when you make the dough. The Gemara says, no, you need shmirah, you need to watch it from the beginning of the process till the end. So that's just interesting in terms of making matzah. And then the Gemara talks about the matzah eaten at the Seder. You know, we're used to eating matzah the whole night, but the Gemara says that the matzah that we eat at the end of the night, right, the afikomen, right, at the end of the night, that is the matzah that is the mitzvah, and therefore there are practical applications or implications. So again, as I said, the whole process needs to be with intent to do a mitzvah. So if you've ever made matzah, I'm fortunate to have a friend who is a baker, and we used to go to their house to make matzah every year. And what he would continue saying is, l'shem matzah mitzvah, l'shem mitzvah matzah, right? As you make it, you have intent that what you're doing is fulfilling the mitzvah of making matzah. So, you know, you could try it this year. Then there's a great story. What happens if a boat carrying wheat falls into the river, right? And now all the wheat, you can imagine, is floating on the river. It got wet. So can you sell it or not to the Jews? The Gemara says or concludes that you can sell it to Jews, but at a little at a time, so that you know that they will finish that grain or that flour. I guess grain, because it's not flour. They will finish it before Pesach, and then it will be okay. The next thing is that you can't put flour or spices into cooked food. And the question is, what pot are we talking about? This should remind you, those of you who have done Masechet Shabbat, we have the concept here of a kli rishon, the actual pot that was on the fire. That is usually the more stringent pot. But you can put it into, some say that you can put it into a kli sheni. Again, once you transferred the food into the second pot, then maybe, again, it's considered less hot, and then you can put it in there. Again, here it says that you have to add vinegar to stop the leavening process. So again, like Rabbi Yossi, again, as we said, Rabbi Yossi says that vinegar stops the leavening process. But maybe vinegar, right? Maybe vinegar by itself stops the process, but vinegar and food, maybe not. Okay. Next, the next Mishnah at the bottom of 40, says that you can't put flour into charoset. Please do not get confused. It is not the charoset that we use at the Seder. This is actually a food that had vinegar in it, or maybe it was mustard. Again, lest it leaven. If you do, you have to eat it right away, or maybe you can't eat it at all. You also can't cook the Korban Pesach with the liquids. Now we get into a conversation about the sacrifice that was brought on for Pesach, right? The Paschal lamb. We are going to talk many prakim, many chapters about this, so not yet. So this is just going to give you a taste. This sacrifice needed to be roasted. So therefore we say you can't cook it with liquids. Again, that would be called cooking as opposed to roasting. But you can put some liquid like on top. You can like baste it. You can, the Mishnah continues that you have to spill out the water that the baker used to cool his hands. Again, as the baker is making the matzah, your hands get warm, so you have a bowl of water to cool it off. This water is going to accumulate dough. You need to spill that out, again, lest you create chametz. And now we're on daf 41. And there's an argument if there's a distinction between flour that's put into charoset or mustard. Again, maybe you can eat it immediately, maybe you have to burn it or bury it. Again, and here, as I mentioned before, there's a disagreement if the vinegar stops the leavening or increases it. Again, as I mentioned, for the sacrifice of the Pesach, you cannot have any liquids with it. Again, as I mentioned, it needs to be roasted and not cooked. And the Gemara says you can't even roast it and then cook it, or cook it and then roast it. That is not allowed. It says that you can't eat it na. Na in modern Hebrew means raw, but here it actually means partially cooked, right? Partially raw, or cooked, but you have to eat it, right? Ki'im tzli esh. It needs to be roasted on the fire. So there's a general prohibition that it needs to be roasted. This is called a lav shebichlaalot, a negative prohibition, but a general category. When you have a general category, it seems that you cannot get lashes for it. And from here we get into a conversation, if all general negative prohibitions you can't get punished for, again, lashes, like Nazir, like here again, and there's that difference of opinion. Another concept that we have for the sacrifice on Pesach is that it needs to be eaten as a group. It's called a chavura. This group needed to be pre-assigned before Pesach, and you needed to commit to being a part of one group, but you cannot be a part of two groups. So that comes up here. Okay, let us continue. Let's move on to Daf 42. Again, here it seems that there is a positive commandment as well that we need to roast the Korban Pesach. The Gemara asks, where do we see the negative commandment? And the Gemara says that anytime it says that God spoke to Moshe and said, lemor means to say, that adds a negative prohibition. Where do they learn it from? The fact that it says lemor. So the Gemara says lo ne'emar, right? It was like a negative thing was said, right? So a negative prohibition was said, or lav emor. Again, tell Israel that there is also a negative prohibition. Okay, sorry. The baker, again, we mentioned the water that the baker is using. So the baker has to spill out that water. And the question is, how does he do that? If there's a lot, he needs to spill it on like an incline so that it rolls down and like gets absorbed over a larger space. If it's a little bit of water, then you can just spill it where it is because it'll be absorbed quickly. Here I thought it's just a great idea. It says that you need to make matzah with something called mayim shelanu. Now, when you translate that word, it sounds like our water. But it is really mayim shelanu, meaning water that rested. Lanu as in lina, rested. And Rashi explains over here that water that was taken from a spring, again, think about when Pesach is. Pesach falls out in the spring. It's still pretty cold, but apparently the spring water is warm, and we don't want to use warm water lest it speed up the leavening, and therefore you have to take out the water from the spring the night before and let it cool down for in the morning. So again, you need mayim. Again, so if you're taking notes on how to make matzah this year, if you're going to make matzah, you need to prepare your water from the night before, or make sure that it is not warm and it is cold so that it does not produce more leavening. The last thing for this chapter is that if you're going to make matzah, again, add this to your list, please do not do it in the sun. The sun will increase the temperature of the water, of the dough. Increase in temperature will increase chametz, the leavening, and therefore don't do that. You need to constantly knead the dough, and as I mentioned before, you need to have 2 bowls, one for the kneading and one to cool your hands down after you knead. And with that, we finish the second chapter in Masechet Pesachim. So good job. 2 down, 8 more to go. And we are now going to start the third chapter. From here, we're going to talk about mixtures of chametz with something that is not chametz. And what do we think about these mixtures? Where does it come from? What's the source? So that is what we will be doing now. Okay, mixtures of chametz. So the Mishnah says that you cannot own the following substances. One is kutach of Bavel. Kutach, I think we have learned it before. Kutach was a condiment that they used in Bavel that was made out of bread that was moldy or fermented, and milk, and this was very sharp. We'll see the significance of its sharpness soon. The next thing is beer from Madai. Interestingly enough, beer originally was made from dates, and only here in Madai did they start adding barley to it, or vinegar, we'll see, they added barley to the beer, and that's why it is chametz, or it's a mixture of chametz, and that's why you have to get rid of it. Vinegar from Edom, again, apparently this specific vinegar had wheat in it, had barley in it, and therefore it was chametz. Zaytum from Egypt, we'll see what that means in a minute. Zuman, that the dyers used. Amilan, that the butchers used. And kolan, that the sofrim used, that the scribes used. We will now, the Mishnah doesn't explain what these things are. The Gemara is going to explain them in a minute. The Mishnah continues and adds women's cosmetics, which is very interesting. I remember, in America, they would come out with a list every year of things that are permitted or forbidden for Pesach, and I remember there's always a whole list of makeup, so that's interesting, right? Your lipstick, your this, your that, so that's just very interesting. And the Mishnah continues and says all of these things are negative prohibitions, but you are not liable for karet. It is not like eating real chametz or pure chametz. Again, as I mentioned, these things are all mixtures. The Gemara now discusses kutach. As I mentioned, the Gemara is quite sharp about, that's funny, quite sharp because it's sharp. About kutach, it says that it's not good for you, it's bad for your eyes, it's bad for your health. From there, the Gemara goes on to some health tips. So you can see over there what's good to eat if you're constipated or if you have diarrhea. So if you're interested, you can read on Daf 42. From here, again, as I mentioned, the Gemara says the beer and the vinegar have barley in them, and that's why you cannot keep them or have them in your house over Pesach. Interestingly, since we mention Edom, again, the vinegar from Edom, so the Gemara kind of parenthetically says that you should just realize that Israel, the Jewish people, and the nation of Edom are, I guess, like opposites. Again, Edom are the descendants of Esav. Some people say it's the Romans. Later on, the Italians. You can take it as far as you want. But the Gemara says if the Jews are doing well, then Edom is doing poorly or weak. When Edom is doing very well, the Jews are doing poorly. So that was just an interesting conversation. From here, the Gemara mentioned the concept of temed. Temed are the dregs of wine. Again, after you crush the grapes, all of the, I don't know what the word is called, the dregs, everything that is left over, you can take that out and then soak that again in water, and that gives you, again, the flavor of wine. Again, it doesn't make wine, but it gives you a flavor. Okay, now we're going on to zeytum. Zeytum was barley, saffron, and salt. Then the Gemara says that basically there are two categories of mixtures that we have here. One is food or drinks that come from a different nation, as we mentioned, Bavel, Madai, Edom, and Mitzrayim, Egypt. The next list are things that are mixtures of chametz, but they are used by professionals. So they are not really or not necessarily edible, but I guess not poisonous. So we have this zoman, which was water-soaked bran, and that was a red dye. Amilan, again in Hebrew that means starch, but here it was like bread that was made to soak up like the froth of the pots. And kolan of the sofrim, it seems was either like was a glue that was like water and rye flour that they used to stick the straps, the leather straps together, or maybe was used to glue parchment together. Again, please do not eat glue, but apparently, again, it's flour and water, so in theory it could be edible. Somebody in our shir is like, do you think that someone is like opening up a book and licking the pages? I don't think that that's the case, but I'm not sure. Then, when we mentioned women's cosmetics, the Gemara says that these are actually not what we would, not really makeup, but I guess you would say like skincare products. Some of these things were used as depilatories to remove hair. Apparently, especially of rich girls. The poor girls would use lime. It was much more acidic. It could not acidic. It's actually probably basic, but it actually burned you. But apparently, that's what they used. Okay, moving on to Daf 43. The Gemara says, again, this Mishnah has a lot of terms or names of things, and the Gemara says, why do I need to know all of these names? So the Gemara says it's important to know the names of these things that are forbidden on Pesach. Again, let's say you go on vacation and you go to a different town and you ask for one thing, you need to know what it's called in this town, lest you end up with a mixture that is chametz. From here, we go onto a new topic, which is called chametz nuksha. Nuksha means, there's a difference of opinion what this means. It could be that it's a grain that started fermenting, or that it ferments on its own, or maybe it's so chametz nuksha, again, it itself is fermented versus, or when compared to a mixture of chametz. Again, as I mentioned, we're talking about mixtures, right now. Another idea Rabbi Meir brings up, seor, not to be confused with seor. Seor is, sourdough, or like your sourdough starter. se'or is a partially fermented dough. Rabbi Meir says that this needs to be burnt, it needs to be destroyed. Rabbi Eliezer says if you eat real chametz, again, pure chametz, you get karet. But if you eat a mixture, it's only a lav, meaning it's a lower level negative commandment. The sages say actually a mixture is not problematic, which is interesting. Not even a negative commandment, but not problematic at all. Rabbi Yehuda, again, I think we mean on a biblical level. Again, don't try this at home. We are more lenient with things that are mixtures, but we do not, the practical law is we still say if something is a mixture, you cannot eat it on Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent with mixtures than nukshe, again, than this partially leavened dough. And we're going to learn it from the verse that says, Kol machmetzet lo tochlu. All things that have leavened or have fermented. Again, the word kol means it's coming to expand, right? More things than we would normally think. So the sages say kol comes to include mixtures. Ki kol, the fact that it says how do you say ki kol? I don't know, all, but with another word in front of it, like, and these, all of this. So basically, it means any chametz, again, leavened by something else as well. From the kol, we're going to learn, and this is fascinating, a fascinating discussion. What about women? Are women prohibited from eating chametz? Are they commanded to eat matzah? The answer, of course, is yes on both accounts. We learn it from here, right? So we say kol, so it says it's used to include women. We might have thought only people that are liable, only people that are obligated to eat matzah are liable for karet if they eat chametz. Therefore, it says kol. That would seem to imply that women are not obligated to eat matzah. The Gemara says no. Men and women are equally liable for chametz, meaning they equally may not eat chametz. Therefore, they are equally obligated to eat matzah. Again, chametz and matzah are comparable, and it says kol ochel, everyone who eats. So the subject is people who eat, and therefore men, it talks about men, and kol adds women, and not mixtures, because mixtures are not people, they are things that are eaten. The sages say, again, they use the word ki kol, that all, I think is the way you would translate it, not just the word kol. Okay, from here we're moving on to daf 44. Here, and I would say daf 44 is probably is a very important daf. Many fundamental concepts or principles are on this daf of 44. These are principles that not only apply to Pesach, but also apply to dietary laws in general. So let's see what that is. So Rabbi Yochanan says, again, we have a mixture of something that is permitted with something that is prohibited. And he says that we learn this only in the case of Nazir. Again, to remind us, the Nazir is a person who takes upon himself to not eat or drink anything that comes from grapes and numerous other things. And it says mishrat, things that are infused with the grape flavor or with grapes. So Rabbi Yochanan says this mixture is forbidden only for Nazir. And then we get into a whole conversation about mixtures. So the sages say no, mixtures are actually, not just for the Nazir, but for everyone. And now we have a case. So the first case is that you have a porridge. This porridge, or, oatmeal, is truma. Again, truma is the gift that we give to the priests, to the Kohanim. Only Kohanim can eat from it. Anybody who is a non-Kohen, a Levi, a Yisrael, right, most of us, we cannot eat truma. Okay, so now, the porridge is truma, which means it's forbidden to somebody who is not a Kohen. And now I added to that garlic and oil, right? I want to flavor my porridge. And the garlic and oil is chulin, meaning it's not truma. It's fine for me to eat. So now, if somebody who was impure, who was tameh, touched this porridge, then the whole thing becomes impure, becomes tameh. Okay, that seems understandable, but what about the flip case? The flip case is that the porridge itself is chulin, meaning it is okay for me to eat, it is permissible, and then I add garlic and oil that are truma. So I add a little bit of garlic and a little bit of oil. Now I'm not allowed to eat that garlic and oil. How does that affect the entire porridge? Right, so this is a mixture. So the Gemara says only the place that the person who is impure touched becomes impure. Now the Gemara says, hold on, why is that the case? Isn't it a mixture? And doesn't it become nullified? Again, garlic and oil, I'm putting a little bit in. Shouldn't I nullify the whole food? So the Gemara says no. So the first answer is maybe I ate a kazait, again an olive's worth of porridge, and in that was a mixture of something that is prohibited and something that is permitted. The Gemara says no, it's not about mixture. Rather, you ate an olive's worth of prohibited items, meaning the garlic and the oil, in the time that it would take to eat half a loaf of bread. In Hebrew, this is called kedei achilat pras. The time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread. This is a very important concept that comes up a lot in the Gemara. It's used as a significant time. It is approximately 9 minutes, and if you eat a kazait within these 9 minutes, you are considered having eaten a kazait, and you have violated the prohibition. So the Gemara says this actually is not a case of mixtures. It's that you actually ate the kazait of the food that is prohibited. Okay. The Gemara then says, don't bring kutach into this conversation. Again, kutach being a mixture of bread and milk. Why? The Gemara says it is so spicy that you can never eat a kazait of it. Again, and even if you just eat it straight, that's not really considered eating, because you're eating it in a strange manner, and therefore we're not even going to discuss kutach. Okay. We are still going to try to understand mixtures. We now have two parallel cases. These two parallel cases are as follows. You have two pots of food. One is truma. Again, I'm not allowed to eat that. One is chulin. I'm allowed to eat that. And now I have two spice mortar and pestles, right? Two, bowls of spices. Again, one truma, which I'm not allowed to eat, one chulin, which I'm allowed to eat. And both of these spices were poured into, one of these pots of food. The Gemara says that it's okay, and we assume that the truma spices fell into the truma pot, and the chulin spices, the regular spices, fell into the regular pot. Now the Gemara says, hold on. How can I make such an assumption? First of all, if you remember, we actually had this case in the beginning of the Masachet. So the Gemara says, how is that possible? How can I assume something? So the Gemara says, it must be because this truma, which is spices, are only a rabbinic level. And therefore, since I'm not sure, right, I have a doubt, and a doubt about something that is rabbinic in origin, there is a concept called safek dirabanan lekula. If I have a doubt that is rabbinic in origin, we are lenient. As opposed to if I have a doubt that is biblical in origin, it is lechumra, it is strict. And therefore, if this was really truma, I would not be able to assume that it didn't get messed up. I would have to assume that it did. We now have a very parallel case. This time it's talking about grain. And as the Gemara says, hold on, grain, that's for sure biblical truma. And how can we assume that it is okay? The Gemara says, nowadays, when truma is on a rabbinic level, nowadays it is a rabbinic level, and therefore, again, we can assume the more lenient case. Okay. From here, we use the word mishrat to soak or infuse. Rabbi Yochanan used it at the beginning of 44 to teach us mixtures. The sages use this word to teach us another concept. This concept is called ta'am ke'ikar. The flavor is like the original substance. What's the case? Think about eating something that is permitted, but it has the flavor from something that was forbidden. So our case, Lisa's asking what is nowadays. Nowadays is after there is no temple, meaning now there is no temple, and most of the Jews are not in Israel. So therefore nowadays is the time of the Gemara and onwards. That is an excellent question. Okay. Ta'am ki ikar, back to that case again, fundamental concept. The case that's given in the Gemara is the Nazir, who's not allowed to drink, he's not allowed to drink wine. What happens if he takes water and he soaks them with grapes? Now he drinks the water, he does not eat the grapes. And it's not wine, it's just water. But it got the flavor from the grapes. That is considered forbidden. Even though he's drinking something permitted, because it has the flavor from something prohibited, he may not drink it. Just recognize, I don't mean it has a flavor of something prohibited, like, bako bits or fakin, right? These things that we have nowadays that taste like something that is forbidden. That's not what I'm implying. I'm talking about something that got its flavor from something prohibited. And that is considered asur. You cannot eat it. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan learns this concept from meat and milk. And he says, again, meat, when you cook meat in milk, it absorbs the flavor of the milk, even though the milk is not there. Okay, the milk is absorbed into the meat, but okay, let's pretend it isn't. Let's just pretend that it got the flavor. Some explain that we're talking about not eating the meat, but eating the milk, right? So think about if you boil milk and meat in a pot, and then you drink that milk. So you're drinking milk, but it has the flavor of the meat. That is, again, asur. You're not allowed to do that. The sages say we can't learn from meat and milk because it's too unique. It is very unique, and it cannot be used as a general category. So then we say, okay, let's learn it from koshering non-kosher pots. When you have a pot that has been used for not kosher or for meat and milk, how do we make it kosher? Right? Again, we have to kosher it, a process either by burning it or dipping it in hot water. We actually discussed this a few weeks ago. But what does the Gemara say? What is in the pot? Why do we need to kosher it in the first place? Why do we need to make it kosher? And the Gemara says, well, it has the flavor of the not kosher food, right? It doesn't have non-kosher food in it. It just has the flavor. So now let's learn from here. Again, the Gemara says here too, this is too unique. Again, because here we're talking about flavor, another important concept, which is called ta'am lifgam. Ta'am lifgam means a spoiled flavor, meaning the pot that was used more than 24 hours ago, the flavor that's in the pot is already spoiled. So really, it's not problematic, though we say you need to kosher it anyway. But these concepts of tam ki ikar and tam lifgam, there are very practical applications. Let's say you use something that was normally used for meat and you put milk in it. A rabbi might ask you, was it used in the past 24 hours? This is based on this concept. Okay, last daf, 45, today's daf. So again, we say these are two unique cases, and therefore we cannot learn. The rule is we cannot learn from two unique cases. We cannot make it into a general category. The two cases are Nazir and the sin offering, and therefore we cannot use this. The sages say, again, you can't learn one from the other. Again, something that was sanctified, like the sacrifice, and something that is chulin, which is regular. And therefore, they're not considered two equal cases. They're considered two separate cases. The Gemara continues and talks about, again, mixtures only when they're eaten together. But when two things that are forbidden are combined, they can actually combine into an olive's worth, even when they're eaten one after the other. Not necessarily in a mixture, but one separately after the other. From here we have a new Mishnah. Here, it got a little complicated, but we are talking about dough that was used to seal the cracks in a kneading trough. Again, I guess you can think of clay, or Play-Doh, or something like that. So you take dough, I guess it gets sticky and it does dry up, and you have your kneading trough, and let's say it gets a crack in it. So you use the dough as like a sealant. Is the dough considered chametz, and do we have to get rid of it or not? So the Mishnah says that if you have a kazait, again, an olive amount of dough, you need to destroy it. Less than an olive, then it is considered nullified. It's considered part of the bowl, and you don't have to get rid of it. And the Mishnah says it's the same law regarding impurity, tum'ah. Again, if you care about it, or care about removing it, then it becomes what's called a chatzitza. Chatzitza is something like a barrier that prevents the water when you go into the mikvah, but we'll talk about that more next week. Here, the question now is in the Gemara, where is this dough? Rabbi Yehuda says in a place where it's needed, let's say at the bottom of the dough, of the bowl, so then you can have a kazait, and you don't need to destroy it. And therefore, you don't need to destroy less than a kazait in a place where it isn't needed. Again, if you think about a bowl, you need the bottom to have no cracks, right, lest the water seep out. If it's on the side, it's less problematic. Another option is that less than a kazait is okay at the bottom, but a kazait or more needs to be destroyed even if it's at the bottom. Again, there are two brightot that support each of these opinions. They do seem contradictory, and therefore, okay, one second, I'll get to therefore in a minute. Then we have a breita that says you have to destroy moldy bread because it can be used as leavening, I guess like a starter that we would think about nowadays. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that only if it's being kept for dough. But I thought this was a great idea. If you have a huge block of moldy dough, you can use it to sit on. So if you sit on a moldy block of dough, then that's okay, and that you don't have to get rid of. So if you have any chairs that are made out of dough, feel free to use them. You might have to cover them in plaster. If you have one, please send me a picture. I would love to see what that looks like. But the Gemara then says, no, let's go back to our bowl. Really, if you think about it, there are three parts to a bowl, right? The bottom, which is going to, right, hold the water and the liquid. The sides that, you're going to need the dough and you need it. You need that to be relatively crack-free. And then the rim, right? The rim of the bowl you don't really need. But, if your dough rises, so it has obviously a use. And therefore different parts of the bowl have different laws. Okay. From here, we have also like I don't want to use the word crazy, but it seems to be a very a strange idea that if you have a half a kazait of chametz in one place and another half a kazait in another place, you have to get rid of them lest you maybe sweep one room into the other and they combine and they make a kazait. So then the Gemara says, well, what if one is inside and one is outside? What if one is upstairs and one is downstairs? What if, they're in completely different rooms? The Gemara says, teku. Again, teku means we leave these questions unanswered. We have to wait for Eliyahu Hanavi to come and tell us the answer. The last thing that we have on today's daf is spoiled cham'ah, another very important concept, and that is in Hebrew it's called ra'ui la'achilat kelev, something that a dog would eat. Interestingly, anybody who has a dog, you can let us know. I guess dogs are not so picky, but at a certain point they are. So, food that is spoiled for people, but if a dog will eat it, that is still considered chametz, and you need to get rid of it. It's considered food for impurity. But if a dog will not eat it, then that's really considered like totally gone, and you do not have to get rid of it, right? This comes up like cleaning supplies, right? Your dog is not going to eat your cleaning supplies, so even if they're chametz, you do not have to get rid of them. Oh, that's so interesting. I think the idea, so Ilana asks, moldy dough, using it as a cushion, aren't you getting benefit? I think the point here is that it is not considered chametz anymore. First of all, it's moldy, so you wouldn't eat it, and because it's so inedible, it has lost its chametz status, and now it's just a really cool chair. Or a really gross chair. So, whatever, however you want to look at it. The last thing that's mentioned here is a tanner. Tanning comes up in the Gemara actually when you want to talk about like the smelliest profession you can find. So interestingly, they have this trough of, I guess they put flour into this water or whatever mixture it was. One note said they actually added excrement to this, so I guess that's why it was so smelly. This is where they put the leather in order to soften it. But the point is they put flour into this mixture. If it's within 3 days of Pesach, you need to destroy it. Again, I guess your dog might eat it. But if it was before 3 days or I guess longer than 3 days, it has already become super disgustingly gross. And therefore, again, it is not considered chametz anymore, and you do not need to destroy it. With that, I wish everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Again, a lot of fundamental concepts. Don't try many of these things at home, but again, very, very interesting concepts that we will definitely be thinking about as we get closer to Pesach. And again, for all of you who have finished 1 year of learning Daf Yomi, kol hakavod, keep going, as we say, 1 day at a time or 1 week at a time. So have a great week, everyone, and see you next week.